So a little bit about us. First of all, I'm Matt Stoner. I'm the creative director of Neuron, and we're a UX UI agency based in San Francisco. So over the past 5 years, we've worked on a number of projects across various mediums, from going from idea to an MVP product, or helping industry leaders to refresh or grow their product offering and features. And if anyone wants to learn more about us, or if this is their first meetup with us, they can check us out at neuronux.com. So that brings us to the top 10 UX and UI trends for 2021. And for me, I have sort of a love-hate relationship with trends, because on one hand, they help push our design industry forward and help new ideas come to the forefront and stand out. And it's a kind of a lot like natural selection. I like to make this parallel, because the sort of limits of design are pushed, the fittest survive, the bad ideas die, and innovation continues to happen. And in today's digital landscape, whether it's in design or from people to brands to music to bands, everything, those that are a bit different from the rest are more likely to be remembered and make an impression. We see this trend in all aspects of life. Like, take this example of rapper Lil Xan, who rose to fame because he had these facial tattoos that helped him stand out in a sea of artists online, like on Instagram and SoundCloud, for purely aesthetic reasons. And he used his image to kind of build this massive following, and as well as wealth. And it was a method that a lot of newer artists started to adopt. And you can see like a lot of his peers across the whole genre just kind of started to look like this, with the bright colored hair, the scribbled ink on their faces, and then no one really stood out anymore. So this aesthetic went from an offensive strategy, which was a competitive advantage, to a defensive strategy. They needed it just to play on that stage. So unfortunately, not so easy to iterate when you have those kind of tattoos. Also, we look at Chobani, who, along with a few other millennial brands, kind of created this aesthetic that rippled throughout branding and websites across all industries. Like, for example, even the doctor's office I used to go to, One Medical, kind of looks like the equivalent of the Chobani brand. So when everyone catches up, you have to innovate again to stand out. It's this cyclical process that's never really done, which is good for us as designers. Now, the first trend I want to talk about is custom illustrations. So, we've seen them everywhere. Some styles have emerged as more of a trend than others, but let's go through some of those now. So we want to talk about bold colors, a freehand style, as well as pattern work. And some people say that illustration isn't really UX, but in fact, in the quote unquote laws of UX, the aesthetic usability effect is one that explains when users perceive something as aesthetically pleasing, they're going to perceive it as more usable. And bold colors as a trend can be attributed to Apple, who is pushing this forward more and more recently in their campaign and their new Big Sur operating system. They tend to lead the way in setting a lot of digital trends. So here we can see it applied in the illustrations for this women's healthcare provider, Tia. It adds visual interest and also helps make healthcare a little less scary or intimidating. So these abstract shapes help them say what they need to do without invoking fear or being overly graphic. And Sage Therapeutics uses this strategy combined with photography to illustrate more abstract concepts and bring interest to the touchy subject of brain disorders. It also ties in nicely with their logo to create a full brand aesthetic. And to me, this is a newer hand-drawn illustration styles that are coming to the forefront are kind of a reaction against the perfect polished visuals that we're seeing, that we were seeing in past years. They add more of a sense of humanity and imperfection that can create more trust with consumers and take on a little bit less of a serious tone. I kind of see it as the equivalent of distressed clothing, for example. So the Cash App here is one example that deploys this more hand-drawn style to make sending money feel a little bit less serious and more fun. Their demographic also tends to skew a little bit younger, especially in their marketing campaigns. Here, they're also pairing this with a bold color, the green background. They have this cool eye that kind of winks and looks around the page as you scroll too, which is kind of fun. So the A to Z of AI uses a hand-drawn illustration style with just a bit of subtle animation to add visual interest, and it captures your attention in a subtle way. It kind of draws you in and engages you. I also think this added motion that they're incorporating really just pushes the hand-drawn style to another level, as opposed to more static versions that we might have seen in past years. Also, when you combine this style with more realistic or three-dimensional elements, when they're crisp and high resolution, it can really tie this concept together and create a sense of nostalgia when it's polished. Or in the case of Airbnb with this textured illustration style, it combines really well with a precise UI. A lot of their UI elements are extremely precise and calculated in thin line or white with a subtle drop shadow. So with the contrast of this drawing style, it feels intentional and well composed. And they even go through the process of illustrating common destinations where you can stay in an Airbnb. It just shows an extra level of care and thoughtfulness, a little bit of playfulness that's personalized when they could have just used like a Google image or something, but you can see they're going the extra mile to bring some delight to their users. Or when it's combined with some subtle animation or motion, it can focus your attention to the center of the screen in this case, which is the value proposition of this company. Or it can take on a watercolor or pastel style, and that brings more of a sense of calm and well-being, which is perfect for this application, which is for prescription delivery. Or sometimes when the product replaces something that you're typically doing on pen and paper, this sketchy style can kind of reinforce that concept. Like this is a note-taking app for teams called Slight. The next style is the pattern work. So kind of these Bauhaus style geometries that we're seeing a lot. I think it's going to continue to trend, but we should be careful not to simply use this style to fill space because it's particularly good at that. But these patterns and geometric abstractions can be used to explain business processes that are really hard to explain to users. That can't solely be done through photography. Like in this case for Algo, it shows how video animation software works, but it's in a much more exciting and engaging way, which would be a difficult thing to explain. So they're doing it through abstraction. Also, this style can be used to create calm, reflective backgrounds, in this case for the Feminist Art Coalition. They're more ambiguous and interesting, and they don't distract too much from the written content. So they can be used to that effect. And so the next style I want to, or the next trend I want to discuss is 3D renders in depth. I see this continuing into 2021. It's kind of an evolution of that flat or deep flat style we've seen explode over the last few years. And the 3D rendered style really takes it a step further, and it owes its influence more to things like gaming or advanced rendering engines and products that are geared at simplifying the process of creating 3D renderings for designers in the cloud. So drawing from game design, we can see Google is using this style to entice their visitors to learn more about their healthcare security products, which could be a little bit boring to some, but the way that they've built it in this exploratory nature, it just makes you want to keep going, keep learning about it. And then when combined with animation, this style can complement the messaging and, again, metaphorically explain complex processes like Maze, their specialties in user testing. So that could be a difficult thing to explain, but they're using three-dimensional graphics, this ball kind of working its way through various contraptions to illustrate that. And then, this new visual style that we're seeing, it does set websites apart and products apart from the pack. In this case, it helps showcase the product features for this presentation software pitch. And I think there's a level of polish here and precision that makes you trust and get excited about this company and their product. It also just looks really cool. And in some cases, you can't really tell whether it's a rendering or if it's a photography of clay or plastic figurines. And I think that adds a little bit of intrigue and attention. You want to spend a little bit longer on these sites. So since we're now able to render more of these kinds of experiences directly in our browsers, it's creating opportunities to view and learn about different product features or customize them before we end up buying them. And the next trend I want to talk about is storytelling, which is going to continue to be a growing trend, especially as most of us are reading online, we're learning online, maybe going to school, browsing products. I think these novel ways of telling stories digitally are going to continue to evolve and develop in 2021. First example here, I think the editorial world in general is coming up with a lot of new ways to tell stories. The New York Times has an entire immersive section of their online paper now, and their stories are really pushing the boundaries of what an article is. In this case, they're investigating this boom in AI created photographs of people that are used in avatars and various online identities. And they're keeping the location static. So as you scroll, it continues to morph into new versions. And then it even allows you to change different parameters on the screen to produce your own faces, which just creates much more interactivity instead of just purely reading. It's a really interesting example. And then Webflow has a microsite that explains the history of web design and art. And these animations are occurring on scroll, and these scenes change, their mood changes as you move through various periods of time. And it's cool because as we get a little bit further down, you'll see they're comparing what designers are doing today in web design with the evolution of traditional art. So here you can see this is this 3D rendered style that we're seeing a lot today. and they're comparing it with like a Caravaggio painting and how his treatment of light falling on objects, particularly humans. So I've found this a really interesting example, especially the way that they combine those parallels. Sorry about that. And of course, Apple has mastered using scroll in general to creatively display their products. And they walk you through why you need to have them. They're really seductive. They use very high resolution photography, and their renderings animate into place really precisely. The messaging is also hitting you at the right moments in between these animations, and they're really effective at highlighting the industrial design and the inner workings of their products using this style. So the next trend that I want to discuss is design systems and ops. I know in 2020, we realized the importance of using design systems because they coordinate designers, developers, and product teams around a single source of truth for their product or product suite. These are places where you're documenting the user interface functionality, the brand components, and even now some of the messaging and copywriting standards within companies and products. We've been getting more requests to do design systems. We do create them for most of our projects, but there's more and more formalization happening around this process. So having a design system has actually saved most designers and developers multiple hours of time per week this year. I think for us, maybe even more than that. But the design system in general will become one's single source of truth, their resource if they have a question, if their documentation is good. And I know some companies were better prepared for remote work because they had a design system in place before the pandemic. And what's kind of driving this further is that teams are more effectively able to work together and draw from and evolve their design systems using collaborative design tools like Figma. We've shifted to Figma over the last couple of years, and having their shared libraries and being able to work together in real time on designs to make iterations and have seamless handoff to development has really helped us immensely, especially while we're all working remotely. Figma's continued its trajectory as one of the most widely used UI design tools, because in 2017, it had relatively low adoption, even below Photoshop and Illustrator. But in 2018, we saw it jump into the second position, according to one survey. And then in 2019, it had Sketch in its sights. And I think when we see the 2020 results, it'll be a much closer race. So I think the pace that Figma is continuing to release new features and incorporate more and more plugins, it appears that it's going to be the software of choice moving forward in 2021 and beyond for design teams. Again, for prototyping, we're seeing that the benefits of not having to leave the design software, like I've done in the past, from Sketch to Envision or the Sketch Cloud, it's made our workflow much more painless, and we're able to test and prototype things a lot faster that way. You'll see it's right about to kind of pass some of the other big players in the space to become the most prominent prototyping tool. And we've seen freelancers and smaller companies adopting it for obvious reasons, but in larger companies, they've been predictably a bit slower in adopting this new software. So they're still predominantly using Sketch, but I think we'll also see that start to change as more advocates internally will push for it. There's more and more tools being released and improved to serve as these repositories for design systems. So this is a place where the team can document, they can view their component libraries for reference and for implementation. So Storybook is one example of software that does that. It's kind of emerged as best in class. And any developer can document or access functional code It can get elements in their behaviors. And here's one example of a design system. It's called Pantsuit, which was actually created for Hillary Clinton's campaign back in 2016. It creates several components that were required for their campaign team to put together these marketing sites, advertisements, posters, fundraising material. And by having this consistent design system in place at the beginning of the campaign, they were able to create new content really fast as a dispersed team as the campaign went on. Just a few other examples of that output. Some microsites. Or in a company like BuzzFeed, their design system actually has over 40 button styles. So that's too many if you ask me, but without a design system in place, this would be really difficult for their team members or any new team member to really understand when to use a button in various different contexts. So the combination of collaborative design software, using design system libraries, those two combined will create much better design processes into 2020 and beyond as we continue most likely in a distributed manner for some time, and some companies going completely distributed. Now, the fifth trend I want to talk to you about is UX writing and microcopy. So we saw job openings over the last 2 years for UX writers really explode. It's become a hot field, and it appears that it'll continue into next year because there's a huge need for companies to understand who their customers are and who they're speaking to, and balance their writing in a way that fits their brand tone and values and attitudes. It's becoming increasingly important as well in orienting a user to where they are within a product flow, letting them know what's needed, how to do it, how to provide contextual feedback to them. And I think increasingly the goal is for the copy to work harder from a brand voice perspective as well as from a UX perspective. And we've all seen bad examples of UX writing and copywriting without any context, confusing language, no solutions, as opposed to some of the better examples of companies who've clearly invested more into getting this right, like MailChimp. So as the field of UX writing booms, I think we want to make sure that they're getting involved at all stages of the design process, especially early, in understanding users, sketching with words or wireframing, and not just relying on them when we get to the final stages of visual design and need to fill in the copy. I think each company or product will have their own standards for how they write, but if none exist, this is where the UX writer is going to come in and help create those standards. Atlassian's a great example of a mature company with robust content standards. It's actually built into their design system. And this is a great resource for anyone who wants to kind of look over and see how this is done very well. It even includes a variety of situations where they might want to provide a little bit more delight to their users and be less formal, and the situations that they can do that in and how they can write successfully in those instances. Or they also have standards for different kinds of UI elements and states, like error states. So in this case, they want to provide crucial information and answer questions like what happened and what are the consequences, why did it happen and will it happen again, and what needs to be done to move forward. So this is a really great example of how this can be done successfully so that everyone's on the same page when they create new elements, new flows and features. And then go back to our MailChimp example here, which is a good one. They're using marketing speak when they can, like under the title, but it doesn't impede the flow, and they're providing clear and concise writing when they need to, like the password rules in this case, and bringing it to the surface. But sometimes companies miss the mark, and found this example from TurboTax. This was an unsubscribed flow, and it references a pop culture breakup. It's a little bit insensitive. It's confusing. To me, it kind of misses the mark. And I think with most people engaging with businesses online due to COVID and just general accelerated digital transformation, getting this copy right can make or break companies who are transacting online. And this really needs to be approached with care in 2021. So trend number 6 I have is uninterrupted UX. And I think without saying this is usually our goal as user experience designers, but there's been some strategies I've seen picking up steam to help reduce friction in different areas of product design. So the average human actually has 100 registered accounts per email address. And actually 86% of those people reuse their passwords, obviously raising security issues. So something I've seen gaining traction is the concept of passwordless login. And we've all had those days where we just can't remember our passwords and we have to send ourselves the email anyways. But with logging in without passwords, it kind of immediately forgives us for those mistakes or for not maintaining a password keeper. It streamlines account creation and it log into solely using the email address every time they log in. So this cuts down on the error states that are required. It's less UI that needs to be created. And actually, on average, it'll allow people faster access to their accounts. So this is a good example from Medium, which is an online publication you guys are probably all reading from. This is one of the first sites that I saw that implemented magic links, and I see them continuing to be popularized throughout other websites and products. So the user can still use social to log in, but if they're doing it with an email, they're simply going to receive it in their inbox. They go there, click the link, and they're into the site. This is just an example of their most recent UI. So Slack is another one that functions in a similar way, except they're supplying you with a one-time passcode for password-free sign-in. And I think we're also going to see more ways to reduce finger and mouse movement. So this is a good example that I've found recently, which was auto-focusing to the first field on a page as soon as the page loads, if it's part of a main user flow. This avoids the user having to really orient themselves or move the mouse and click. And then providing alerts at the site of the action. So in this binary select modal, it appears in a smaller format and beneath the element that's selected to reduce the amount of mouse movement, help them accomplish their task faster, opposed to providing a big modal dialog in the center of the screen, which requires them to orient themselves and move the mouse further to take that action. This is related to something called Fitts law of UX, that the time to acquire a target is a function of the distance to and size of the target. So when we're using a piece of software all day, every day, those precious seconds really add up and they make huge difference. Like in our company recently, we decided to stick with Asana for our project management simply because they have all these little features that provide efficiency and ways to save time. Now, the 7th one is accessibility. And of course, we've talked about accessibility a lot before at our meetups. We've had dedicated meetups for this, but I think its emphasis in digital design is going to continue to grow for both ethical and legal reasons. There's this myth of the minority user. Most people consider those with disabilities to be a small subset of their user base, more of an edge case, but in reality, almost 1 in 5 Americans have a disability of some kind, and at least 54% of them are going online every day. So they're going to require some specific technology to help them accomplish tasks like navigational affordances or screen magnifiers, readers, captioning technology, etc. And I think that in general, the world's starting to recognize that the web should be designed for everybody the same way that it is in physical space, and that it's not a right. I mean, it is a right, not a privilege. This was a good quote from the W3C initiative. And we're seeing more and more tools released to test our designs so that the content can be read by assistive technologies correctly, as well as getting our color contrast ratios and text sizes appropriate for those that might have a vision impairment. And then for those with cognitive or mental or emotional impairments, being cognizant of the way we write is becoming more and more important. So using simple words, fewer words, relying less on words like click and tap to be more welcoming, and adding transparency to our flows to combat these dark patterns. That was actually the subject of one of my past talks. And then providing solutions to errors to empower users. This is actually part of the Atlassian design system again. So they have a whole section on ableism and the way that they write for it. The whole section is called inclusive writing. So the common examples of words and phrases that might be distasteful or that people don't realize can be triggering. And they offer solutions to their team for what to write in exchange. So these are examples that are referring to more of the accessibility space, but they have many other types of content as well. So like instead of saying crazy or lame or spaz, saying words like wild, hectic, or intense is just one example. This is a web accessibility solution that's come to our attention over the last little while called Accessibility. It seems to be adopted at a pretty fast rate these days. It's a fully automated solution. Basically, with a few lines of code, you can outfit your site for various adjustments that your users can make for different conditions. With the flip of a toggle in some states for seizure-safe profiles, visually impaired profiles, etc. And then they have other more fine-tuned adjustments that you can make to things like specific content, font, or color adjustments. It's a pretty cool tool. The unfortunate side of all this, though, is that this is really what gets their customers to buy it, the fact that it protects them from litigation. And we've seen a little bit of development in this space. So currently only public sector only public sector websites have to comply with the WCAG, which holds sites to similar standards as they would in the physical environment of ADA. But in the next year, and I think in the years to come, we're going to see pressure put on the private sector to begin to comply here. A couple of key things. There's one lawsuit that's ongoing between Domino's and a blind man who was trying to order food online from the website, and it looks like there's going to be a settlement in his favor. So that's kind of a warning cry to other businesses that they need to start making their websites and their products accessible to everybody. The European Accessibility Act is going to mandate private sector to align with their version of the WCAG in 2022, and actually up in Canada and Ontario, they're going to require it by the end of this year. Now, trend 8 is designing for mental health, which I think is become more and more important as this pandemic has raged on for the last 9 or 10 months. I think it's accelerated the trend in products and services geared toward mental health and awareness around how we design for it in general. Another thing that I think highlighted this was the social dilemma, which I'm sure most of you have seen on Netflix. It's about the toxic nature of many social media apps. And we're seeing more of our friends doing digital detoxes and trying to improve their well-being, their productivity. Maybe they started doing yoga, meditating. Apple screen time is addressing growing concerns with device usage and smartphone addiction. They're trying to make you aware of how much time you're spending on it, the types of engagement, and the specific apps that you're using. And with screen time, you can kind of manage yourself and your kids' time and set time limits for various activities. And we've seen a huge boom in meditation apps, even pre-pandemic, and that doesn't seem to be slowing down at all as we move into next year. Headspace actually had 65 million downloads in 2020. They're continuing to target employers to offer their apps for free to their employees. And the popular app Calm actually had 60 million downloads in this past year. So it's becoming a huge industry. And I think platforms for virtual consultation and appointments have seen mass adoption just out of necessity during the pandemic. And I don't think this trend is going anywhere because it just makes too much sense from a convenience perspective. This is going to present a lot of opportunities for designers to impact these experiences and help make them even better. Go beyond just the virtual chat experience. So Talkspace is proven to be pretty effective for replacing face-to-face therapy. And I think there'll be many new products and experiences that solve this exact problem, but in adjacent fields. Stoic is an interesting app for mental health. So they're using more of this muted color palette, really stripped down Zen-like user interface, and really sparse messaging in their app. Or Yona, this app helps to humanize the pelvic exam, bringing more of that human aspect to a virtual experience that would normally be done in the doctor's office. So they're using a really interesting and subtle color palette, kind of calming colors. And the way that they write is also really reassuring. It's almost like you're talking to a kind-hearted nurse. It helps ease your nerves as a patient who might be doing this to themselves for the first time. And then Instacart, obviously delivery apps have been booming throughout the pandemic as well. They're doing small strategies here and there to put customers at ease, like allowing them to make changes to their cart right up until the shopping begins in case they forgot something. It's obviously a stressful time for everybody, but providing more information about each step of the process, reducing that cognitive load and questions that they might have, and then reminding their customers when the order was dropped off and where it was left, giving that peace of mind with the photo included. And then Netflix is rolling out a tool for parents to better understand what their kids are watching, calling it the Kids Activity Report. So data on what programming they're spending the most time watching, who their favorite characters are. It'll also recommend other content based on their interests, which could be nice for them to get some time away and have their kids watch some TV. These strategies are also kind of all aimed at making our digital lives a little less stressful during this time. So the ninth trend I want to talk about is immersive experiences. This is the most interesting thing for me to happen since the pandemic began. There's a lot of these new immersive experiences that aim to recreate experiences one would have in the physical world, but online. And I think there's continuing to be a lot of opportunity to innovate in this area. So the first experience, going to a museum, obviously we're not doing that right now. But Google Arts and Culture it's a really cool service from them to help museums recreate their galleries online. So any institution can come on, they can create their hub, they can curate their galleries with all their artwork. Um, and then for some of them, they can even let you walk through the halls using um, their typical Google functionality. And it really puts these creative tools into the hands of these institutions so that they can create more engaging experiences and sort of replace the experience of wandering through a museum, spending some time with the art. The photography is really high resolution in some cases. It kind of reminds me of back in the day when I had the Encyclopedia Britannica disc on my computer. It was just created this world for you to explore. Next, I think engagement with media is going to be taken to kind of a new level. I think with so many things to watch, we're going to see more experiences that attempt to tell stories in new and different ways as a supplement to the content itself. This is, in my opinion, kind of a reaction to not wanting people to just watch something once, finish the series, and forget about it forever, because there's so many options these days. The experience that I'm going to show you is, in my opinion, kind of like the modern version of an album cover or a leaflet with a lot of extra information to kind of dive further into your experience. So the Netflix show Dark has this web experience that lets you kind of explore the episodes that you want to, so as to not spoil them if you haven't watched them. But you can get a sense of the interconnectedness of all the characters in the show and what's happening to them throughout the course of it. I think time travel is a big aspect in this show. So you can zoom in on, kind of explore one individual character, as we'll see in a second. And it walks through different aspects of the timeline and scenes that they were a part of, different chapters in the story. I think employing strategies like this is going to create stronger franchises around these pieces of media and build more loyal and engaged fan bases in general. And then the final example here is recreating a haunted house experience. So obviously that's something that kids weren't doing this year at Halloween. But Hulu created this immersive digital haunted house for anyone to experience. So I did this the other day, actually. They let you personalize it as if it's a ride. So you can add your own face to this. And then you can start wandering through this abyss. And it's cool that your photo actually gets put into their content in interesting ways. It personalizes it, and then you slowly work your way through various scary situations. I guess you're younger. Drawing from game design here. You can use your cursor to kind of look around. And then it kind of ends in creating this like scream video that you can then share throughout social media. All right, so we made it to the last one. This is privacy. Thanks for sticking with us. I know it's been a little bit of a long presentation, but I think privacy concerns and awareness around it is going to continue to be fueled in 2021, because there have been so many breaches and incidents of misuse over the past few years. But there have been some interesting developments, like the CPRA, the California Privacy Rights Act, just passed recently. This should initiate further adoption of regulations on what personal information businesses can share. And typically, California tends to lead the charge on these types of issues and set the stage for wider implementation. And Facebook, who's notoriously negligent in this area, has a lot of new resources for controlling your privacy and understanding what you share and what you can do about it. At least they're starting to show that they care about this issue because their users are clearly demanding it. So you can go through these different categories and control your own privacy and do this privacy checkup. And then Apple has started to take a strong stance on privacy. It's also driving a lot of their recent marketing campaigns. They're trying to be seen as the leader in this area. This was an interesting site, subdomain of their site. Thought it was interesting. There's actually a lot of features that I wasn't previously aware of. And then Firefox from Mozilla. It's another example of a product whose main differentiator is its dedication to privacy. And then, of course, the president's move to ban TikTok unless they sold their assets to an American company. This has really thrown the issue of privacy into the spotlight over the last little while. I think December 4th was their date to facilitate a deal, but I think they missed that deadline again for the third time. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens here as we move into 2021. And I'm not a privacy expert, but Kelly Huang, who's the VP of product at Ethica, she knows a lot about this topic, and she's going to be presenting at our January 13th meetup, how to build a digital experience without weak privacy. So we hope you join us for that one.